Hi everybody, this is Marlene Pellicer with Eerie News, and today is May 1st, 2022, Saturday, May 1st, well, no, technically Sunday, May 1st, 2022, and I'm going to open up with a, something, how can I say it? This is a short article that appeared on Eerie News itself, and a lot of people are very familiar with the murder of JonBenet Ramsey back in the 90s. And this recently came out titled John Ramsey Seeks New Probe into His Daughter JonBenet's Murder. Ramsey is hoping that DNA will finally bring resolution to the 1996 murder of his 6-year-old daughter JonBenet. He has petitioned Colorado Governor Jared Polis so the items from the crime scene, which so far had not been tested for DNA, should be screened. From what I understand, there are many items or from the crime scene that have been tested, but not all of them. He goes on to say, however, John Ramsey has specified that it should be done by an independent agency and not the Boulder Police Department. Ramsey called Boulder cops inexperienced and faulted them for not accepting help from people who knew what they were doing. According to Fox News, he said, why they won't test the DNA samples that should be tested for DNA, I don't know. It's baffling. John Ramsey and his wife Patsy, who passed away in 2006, were considered suspects, but in 2008 they were cleared when an unknown male DNA was found on JonBenet's clothes. In 2019, their son Burke was also cleared by DNA, and he settled a $750 million defamation suit with CBS after they suggested he might have been the person to rape and kill the young girl. JonBenet was murdered on December 26, 1996. Her father discovered her body in the basement of their Colorado home 7 hours after she was reported missing. Her skull was broken by a blow to her head, and she was strangled with a garrote that was still tied around her neck. A ransom note had been left on the kitchen staircase, and this is what it read. It was a handwritten note, and it was titled, Mr. Ramsey, listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction. We do respect your business, but not the country that it serves. At this time, we have your daughter in our possession. She is safe and unharmed, and if you want her to see 1997, you must follow her instructions to the letter. You will withdraw $118,000 from your account. $100,000 will be in $100 bills, and the remaining $18,000 in $20 bills. Make sure that you bring an adequate size attaché to the bank. When you get home, you will put the money in a brown paper bag. I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow to instruct you on delivery. The delivery will be exhausting, so I advise you to be rested. If we monitor you getting the money early, we might call you early to arrange an earlier delivery of the money, and hence an earlier delivery pickup of your daughter. Any deviation of my instructions will result in the immediate execution of your daughter. You will also be denied her remains for proper burial. The two gentlemen watching over your daughter do not particularly like you, so I advise you not to provoke them. Speaking to anyone about your situation, such as police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. If we catch you talking to a stray dog, she dies. If you alert bank authorities, she dies. If the money is in any way marked or tampered with, she dies. You will be scanned for electronic devices, and if any are found, she dies. You can try to deceive us, but be warned that we are familiar with law enforcement countermeasure and tactics. You stand a 99% chance of killing your daughter if you try to outsmart us. Follow our instructions and you stand a 100% chance of getting her back. You and your family are under constant scrutiny, as well as the authorities. Don't try to grow a brain, John. You are not the only fat cat around, so don't think that killing will be difficult. Don't underestimate us, John. Use that good southern common sense of yours. It is up to you now, John. Victory. And then at the bottom it had the initials SBTC. In actuality, when this note was found by Patsy Ramsey, the child was dead in the basement of the house. This was not the first child John Ramsey lost. In 1992, his daughter Elizabeth Posh Ramsey, 22, was killed in an automobile accident along with her boyfriend, Matthew Darrington. An 18-wheeler crashed into the car. She was the oldest of 3 children from John Ramsey's first marriage to Lucinda Pash. JonBenet was interred in Marietta, Georgia cemetery next to her half-sister, Elizabeth. Now, as to suspects, and I've seen this in a lot of these murder cases that get attention, and this is not even a recent thing. Contrary to what people think, that because of the media, TV, I've seen this in research that I've done, even in the 20s and 30s, where the only media was basically mostly newspapers and some radio. There would be people coming up to confess to murders that they had not committed. It's incredible. But anyway, in 1997, Michael Helgoth committed suicide after the police department declared in a press conference they were coming close to producing a new name as a perpetrator of the crime. He was an electrician who was allegedly involved in a property dispute with the Ramseys. Eventually, he was cleared by DNA. Then in 2000, a local man who was a known sex offender named Gary Oliva was arrested on drug charges. Inside his backpack, police found a magazine cutout of JonBenet. He was released, and in 2016 he was arrested again on child abuse charges and was sentenced to 10 years. In 2019, in a series of letters to a high school classmate, he claimed that he killed JonBenet. He was cleared by not being a match to DNA evidence from the crime scene. Again, this man obviously is a sex offender and child abuser, and he's already in jail, and he's admitting to the murder of JonBenet, which of course he didn't commit because his DNA didn't match. Then in 2019, Randall DeWitt Simmons, 66, was indicted on 15 counts of first-degree encouraging child sex abuse in Oregon. He was convicted in 2021 of all 15 counts and sentenced to 10 years. Simons had reportedly photographed JonBenet a few months before her murder. In 1998, he was arrested for walking naked down a Colorado street mumbling, "I didn't kill JonBenet." He was ordered to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. However, it's unknown what happened with the case. In July 2018, the police were led to Simons when employees at a local A&W restaurant in Oak Ridge reported someone was using their Wi-Fi signal to download X-rated content. Investigators traced it back to a man living near the restaurant. The computer identification address for the computer belonged to a man who sold that particular computer along with others to Simons, who lived near the restaurant. They tracked Simons' activity to his home. Simons was never declared a suspect. However, in 1997, he sold several glamour photographs of JonBenet to a photo agency for $7,000, which later he declared ruined his career because of the notoriety connected to the case. He wasn't just a photographer, he was a child photographer. And if I understand, I do remember that he would go to these child beauty pageants that JonBenet had participated in to take photographs of the girls, in this case. I believe probably to approach the parent or parents and see if they wanted to buy the photographs from him. Then this I want to say is one of the most famous of all the false confessions having to do with JonBenet Ramsey. In 2001, John Mark Carr lived with his wife and 3 children in San Francisco. He was employed as a school teacher. Investigators acquired computer evidence of child pornography in April 2001 when he substituted in schools in Sonoma and Napa counties. He pled not guilty and was ordered to report to a probation officer and to avoid child pornography, children in places where children congregate, such as schools, beaches, and parks. He chose to flee the country. In the meantime, California school officials stripped him of his teaching credentials. Among the evidence found by police was correspondence between Carr and Richard Allen Davis, the man who killed 12-year-old Polly Klaas in 1993. The 2001 police report detailed how he was fascinated with the case. The police found letters from Davis to Carr, along with photographs of Carr wearing makeup, a .38 semi-automatic pistol, and hundreds of photos of small children. Davis was sentenced to death in 1996, and as of 2022, he remains on California's death row in the Adjustment Center at San Quentin State Prison. During those years, after he fled, Carr's online resume reflected that from 2001 to 2002, he taught English to grade school children in Seoul, South Korea, and then Heemstede in the Netherlands. From 2002 to 2003, he worked as a private school teacher and caregivers in schools in the Netherlands and Germany. From there, he made his way to Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and Honduras. Eventually, he returned to Thailand, where he was extradited from in 2006 when he was 41 years old. At that time, he had just started a job where he was teaching second grade. From Colorado, he was extradited to California to face the charges of child pornography that were pending since 2001. Eventually, the charges were dropped after police mishandled evidence. Investigators considered Carr in the murder of 12-year-old Georgia Moses. While living in Georgia, he rented an apartment to an African-American family with the surname of Moses. Georgia's remains were found very close to Carr's Petaluma home, wrapped in a piece of carpet. She had been dumped on the side of Highway 101. He moved to Petaluma years after the crime, but police believe he might have been familiar with the area from before. Carr was married twice to girls, 16 and 13 years of age. In 2010, the Daily Beast reported that his first wife said she married him when she was 13 years old and was forced to commit degrading sex acts with him. They had married in Alabama, and he had forged her age on the marriage certificate. He would dress up in her clothing and wear makeup. Less than a year after the 1984 wedding, it was annulled. Lara Carr, his second wife, filed for divorce 2 days after he was arrested. In the divorce affidavit filed by Lara Carr, she said her husband was told, quote, by one school in or about 97 or 1998 that he would not be asked to continue to serve as a substitute teacher because he had a tendency to be too affectionate with children, end quote. A judge issued a 3-year restraining order for Carr to stay at least 100 yards away from his wife and 3 sons, then ages 8, 9, and 10. Shortly after is when he fled the country and was gone for the next 5 years. In 2007, Carr was arrested in a domestic case and charged with battery and obstruction. This involved an argument with his father, Wexford Carr, who lived in suburban Atlanta at the time. Carr came to the police's attention again when a former student complained of threatening emails he sent her. Samantha Spiegel was a former 4th grade student at San Francisco's Convent of the Sacred Heart School. Carr was mysteriously fired just after 20 days of working there. Spiegel and Carr reconnected later via the internet when she was a teenager and was battling drug addiction. She recognized him when he was brought back from Thailand, and his face was splashed across media outlets. When she was 17, they became engaged until her parents intervened. They sent her to a treatment center for 16 months. In 2010, the Atlanta News reported that Spiegel, 19, gained a restraining order from Carr. Sandy Springs police served the restraining order issued in San Francisco after Carr had sent her several emails, writing in one, quote, if you deceive me, I will kill you. Another read, if you cost me my little girls, I will hunt you down and kill you. The police found him at his father's house in Georgia. According to Spiegel, Carr planned to undergo gender reassignment surgery in order to get closer to little girls. Spiegel claimed that Carr started a child sex cult called the Immaculates. He wanted her to help him to recruit girls 6 years old or under, preferably brunettes. Prior to this, Carr had become infamous when he confessed to killing JonBenet Ramsey. According to CNN, there was no DNA match to link Carr to the JonBenet crime scene. His family also provided evidence he was with him in Georgia when the crime was committed. A former fiancée of Carr, Brooke Dovgan, reported that Carr would visit JonBenet's tomb in Georgia, which was very close to where they lived in Alabama. According to Carr's personal website, he claimed that in 2006 he underwent an orectomy, which is a surgical procedure in which one or both testicles are removed. He said this eliminated sex thoughts and fantasies away. In 2008, John Mark Carr changed his legal name to Alexis Valoran Reich, or Delia Alexis Reich, according to a Washington state driver's license, after coming out as transgender. Then he moved from North America. He changed his name back after his new name became associated with his prior name. He returned to the United States in 2017, but then sold his home and allegedly left the U.S. in 2020. And hopefully, again, and I've brought this up because there have been several cold cases that have been solved after DNA has been used. And in this case, people have been excluded. People have been excluded because they, contrary to them wanting to be involved or linked to a horrendous crime, one of the most horrendous, the murder of a child, they're not. So hopefully, I hope Mr. Ramsey is allowed to get the rest of those items screened. And I don't see why he should not be, because I guess in order to access all that evidence, they belong to the state. So I believe that's why he's petitioning the governor to have access to them. It's, as a matter of fact, this past December was 25 years that the murder was committed. All right, let's go on to the next one. And this is out of Yahoo, and it's titled, "Our efforts to find alien life have gone nowhere. This new strategy could change that." For more than 60 years, scientists have been pointing radio antennas at the sky, hoping to overhear broadcasts from an alien civilization, proof that we're not alone in the universe. But the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI, is like listening for a whisper in a hurricane. Space is incomprehensibly big. There's noise sputtering from every direction, especially from the countless number of stars dying and being born. A signal from ET might be faint. We've only got so many instruments and so much time, money, and manpower for our intergalactic eavesdropping. Worse, we might not even recognize an alien broadcast when we hear it. After all, who knows how ET would actually communicate? Ross Davis, a specialist in information and communication sciences at Indiana University, is willing to venture a guess at what aliens sound like from afar. He hopes that could be enough to help SETI scientists cut through the noise and narrow their search. All of this to help us arrive closer to the answer of one of humanity's most important questions. Is there life elsewhere in the universe? In a new study that has not yet been peer-reviewed, Davis described how high-tech alien civilization might use long-range microwave radio to relay messages from planet to planet, and also how to navigate between them. With this dual purpose technosignature as a guide, SETI practitioners could direct our attention to the spots in space where possible alien broadcasts make the most sense, thereby eliminating huge chunks of the galaxy from the SETI search pattern. It's a potentially elegant solution to an old problem in radio-based SETI. Historically, radio SETI has searched only a small portion of the sky for technosignatures, Davis said. Our slow, narrow, and random search of the vastness of space is one possible reason we've never actually found any alien signals. It's like scooping just a single glass of water from the ocean, Davis said, paraphrasing astronomer Jill Tarter, an early SETI advocate. Davis's approach, if it stands up to peer review and finds widespread acceptance in SETI, could shrink the cosmic ocean. The hunt for alien signals would still face long odds, just slightly less long. Many scientists consider it a mathematical likelihood that there's other life out there, somewhere. Why would our planet and our planet alone evolve life? Earth is not the center of the universe, Martin Dominic, an astronomer at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland, told the newspapers. Why should we be the only ones? If these scientists are right and Homo sapiens is just one of many sentient species in the Milky Way, then Davis's technosignatures could help bring forward the day when we finally meet them. What we now call the research field of SETI got its start in 1960 when Cornell University astronomer Frank Drake pointed an 85-foot wide radio telescope in West Virginia at the stars Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani. The former is similar to our own sun. The latter occupies a place in the galaxy that makes it visible from most of Earth's surface. He did a quick scan, listening for a signal that sounded artificial. That is, a signal that would repeat within a narrow bandwidth. He heard nothing, just random noise. SETI has gotten a lot more sophisticated since then. There are scientific bodies all over the world listening for alien chatter. Scientists have also begun scanning for patterns of laser light that could hint at extraterrestrial space exploration efforts, a practice they call laser SETI. But the expansion of our SETI efforts haven't turned up any evidence of ET, leading some scientists to believe it's time to take a closer look at just a few places of interest. We could start by trying to put ourselves in the aliens' shoes. We need to imagine what much more advanced extraterrestrials would do. Douglas Vacock, who heads METI International, a SETI research organization in San Francisco. Davis proposed we start by asking ourselves where an alien civilization might thrive, and expand to the point where it starts beaming signals we might detect here on Earth. Wade Rush, a science lecturer and author of Extraterrestrials, said he endorses that approach. We need to go back to first principles and figure out what we think we're looking for. The place to start looking, Davis posited, is among the known exoplanets. That is, planets beyond our own star system, but still within our galaxy and close enough to glimpse. Astronomers peering through increasingly powerful telescopes have been identifying exoplanets since 1992. Today, NASA's running list includes around 5,000 of these faraway planets. Even 5,000 planets is too many for an intensive search. We could pick the best candidates for a careful SETI survey by mapping them in relation to each other. A tight cluster of exoplanets, perhaps spread across a handful of neighboring stars, might make more sense as a state of a sprawling alien civilization than, say, one lonely exoplanet spinning all by itself around some isolated star. The idea is that any alien civilization broadcasting signals we might overhear from hundreds or even thousands of light years away would, by definition, be sophisticated enough to also create off-world colonies around its own home star, as well as neighboring ones. The latter might even be a prerequisite for the former. After all, why should aliens just randomly shoot radio signals across the galaxy? In Ross's thinking, it's more logical that they'd beam information-rich wideband microwave messages between their homeworld and surrounding colonies. Messages we might be able to eavesdrop on if we're lucky enough to be in the path of a stray signal. The result of Ross's network first approach to SETI would be a map of a potential alien civilization, one with a central hub, outlying nodes and potential connections between them. An organization not unlike our own species' computers networks, but spread across several light years. It makes sense that an advanced civilization would organize itself in this way, Vacock says. Aliens who have expanded beyond their home planet might establish a communications network that looks like a wagon wheel. Their homeworld would be at the hub of the network, and strong directed radio signals would travel in straight lines to distant colonies, like a series of spokes radiating out from the central hub. The groups of exoplanets with the most potential close connections are the one we should be searching for signals, Ross said. Specifically, we should be listening for repeating wideband microwave broadcasts with embedded coordinates. A repeating wideband signal implies deliberate construction. That is, a message with lots of information. Interstellar HD television is how Vacock characterized it. The embedded coordinates would tell us that one alien is trying to tell another alien where they are in relation to each other, the galactic equivalent of dropping a pin on your map app. Find both, and you may have found ET. If there's a downside to Davis's techno-signature approach to SETI, is that it hinges on big assumptions. You start by assuming aliens would communicate like we would, with a broad microwave signal chock full of information. Then you go looking specifically for that kind of broadcast. There's a kind of human vanity baked into that attitude. We tend to view the technologies and opportunities for SETI through the lens of our latest technologies, Rosh explained. Davis's approach risks overlooking different kinds of communication, as well as possible extraterrestrial civilizations inhabiting seemingly unlikely corners of the galaxy. But Davis countered that people and aliens might have no choice but to communicate in similar ways. The aliens on these exoplanets and we here on Earth have a common denominator, the scientific laws of the universe that we both have to deal with. And considering the scale of the problem, an entire galaxy to listen in on, and only so many scientists with so much time to do the listening. Davis' assumption, however imperfect, might still be pretty helpful. It does make sense to focus our attention and resources, Rush said. If searching for ETs is like scooping cupfuls of water from the ocean. Shrinking the ocean to a lake at least could keep us from despairing at the seeming hopelessness of the task. Isn't that interesting? But then at the same time, if you think about it, it's like, wow, you are, it's all, again, this is all based on everything from man's point of view, as in mankind here on earth, an earthling's point of view, as far as choosing the exoplanets, the form of communication. What if this alien life form has existed and basically not the way we did, or not the way we think of as life, that we say the potential for life is there. Or when you hear where they discovered water on this planet, so there's a chance of life. What if this form of life, whatever it is, doesn't need that? It's not carbon based. I mean, yeah, I have a feeling that more than likely ET's going to come and, tap us on the shoulder versus the other way around. I don't think it's ever going to be a random thing like that. But let's get on to another good story out of DNYU's, titled Christian Village in Israel Digs into its Crusader Past. In Milia, Israel, in the middle of Elias Araf's home, between two living rooms, a cactus garden, and a makeshift gym, there are two large pits, each containing the ruins of a church that archaeologists believe was built about 1600 years ago. Mr. Araf found large sections of the church's mosaic floors under his house in 2020, as he tried to convert his aunt's bedroom and an olive oil storeroom into a new kitchen. The kitchen project was quickly abandoned. Instead, Mr. Araf turned the central part of his house into an archaeological dig, and later minor tourist attraction. "We did lose part of our house," said Mr. Araf, 69, a mustached electrical engineer, "but what we have underneath us is something that money can't buy." In practically any other village in Israel, Mr. Araf's decision to dig up his home would have been unheard of. But in Milia, a hilltop village of some 3,200 people, mostly Arab Christians, in northern Israel, he is part of an eccentric trend of privately funded archaeological excavations. Since 2017, 4 families have begun the process of excavating 10 private homes, searching for Crusader and Byzantine ruins. Hundreds more families in Milia have funded a village-wide project to restore parts of its crumbling Crusader castle. In the process, the villagers have discovered the largest known winery from the Crusader era, a Crusader town wall, a Roman cistern, and Iron Age cooking equipment, as was the Byzantine church underneath Mr. Araf's home. It was a domino effect, said Rabbi Kamisi, an archaeologist from the village who is the driving force behind the project. In Milia, excavation became something like a tradition. For years, the villagers had known they were living atop and among an array of archaeological treasure, but they never had got around to digging up much of it. Parts of the present-day village date from the 12th century, when Frankish Crusaders built a castle there, probably during the rule of Baldwin III, a Christian king of Jerusalem. Today, Milia remains one of a handful of Christian-majority villages in Israel. Most of its residents are Greek Catholics, whose ancestors began to settle here during Ottoman rule in the mid-18th century. Many live in homes built among the ruins of the Crusader castle, which became the backdrop to the lives of generations of villagers, but it was never properly excavated or restored. The council always said, "We'll do the work, we'll work on the castle," said Dr. Kamisi, who grew up in the castle's shadow, but nothing ever happened. The turning point came in early 2017, when part of the castle wall began to collapse, endangering passerbys. A specialist in Crusader-era archaeology, Dr. Kamisi, 45, had only recently started a new research post at a nearby university and had little time for a new project, but he realized it was now or never to preserve the fortress and felt it was a matter of hometown honor. "I'm going to restore the castle," he remembered thinking. "If I don't do it, I will leave the village. I can't live here." So began the first of several restoration and excavation projects in Milia. Dr. Kamisi encouraged the village council to call a meeting at which he asked families to each donate the equivalent of the cost of 2 cigarette packs. The villagers answered the call, giving roughly $60,000, and the council pitched in $30,000. The Israel Antiquities Authority quickly supplied the relevant permits. Several weeks later, the most dangerous stretch of the wall had been shored up. Historically, residents of villages like Milia had been wary of notifying the Antiquities Authority if they found any hidden relics, which, though often kept in the custody of the homeowner, legally became state property. Residents feared the government might take over their property or demand time-consuming excavations if a particularly noteworthy ruin was discovered. For Palestinian citizens of Israel, as some Milia residents defined themselves, the fear was particularly sharp. Several villagers said because the government had reacquisitioned Arab-owned land across Israel in the decades after the founding of the state. But the wall restoration project gave the villagers greater trust in the authorities, not least because Dr. Kamisi was the main intermediary between the village and the government. "He's a son of the village," said Salma Asaf, a former accountant who owned several properties in and around the castle ruins. "He broke the wall between us and the Antiquities Authorities." Soon the village clergy allowed the excavation of the village church, where Dr. Kamisi said Iron Age pottery was dug up. But the most dramatic discovery was lurking underneath Miss Asaf's own property next door. Miss Asaf, 69, was in the middle of turning her family's Ottoman-era house into a restaurant. As the builders worked in its cellar, they discovered an ancient stone structure. Galvanized by Dr. Kamisi's recent project, Miss Asaf invited him over to examine it. The archaeologists quickly realized it was a previously unknown section of the Crusader town, perhaps part of a medieval wine press. Excited, Dr. Kamisi called the Antiquities Authority asking for permission to dig deeper. A permit was granted unusually quickly, within days. Just as the wall restoration had made the village less wary of the authorities were now more confident in the villagers. They were also reassured by the involvement of Dr. Kamisi. "We knew him, we trusted him," said Camille Sari, the authorities director of Northern Israel. "He cares for what he's doing." Armed with trowels, shovels, and pickaxes, Dr. Kamisi and the Asaf family set about excavating the cellar themselves. After digging for 2 weeks, Dr. Kamisi suddenly started shouting and jumping. About 2 yards under the floor, he had found the first signs of a Crusader-era drainage system. Miss Asaf's building experts later concluded was standing above the largest known wine press in the Crusader era, a revelation that drew the attention of a major Israeli newspaper, Haaretz. "It was the most wonderful time of my life," Miss Asaf remembered. Energized by the discovery, Miss Asaf began buying up other properties around the castle, excavating them with Dr. Kamisi's help, and then restoring them. They uncovered a Crusader waterworks and a Roman-era cistern that the Crusaders appeared to have used as their own. Neither were seismic discoveries, but they helped archaeologists deepen their understanding of Crusader life in the 12th century, when European Christians consolidated their efforts to colonize their region by force. "The finds themselves are important for a Crusader historian or an archaeologist like myself," said Adrian Boas, a professor of medieval archaeology at the University of Haifa. "They're adding information to what we know about the Crusader period. But perhaps more significantly, they have helped make villagers more aware of the importance of the past and their connection to the place they live in," Professor Boas said. Down the hill, Mr. Araf was the next to catch the archaeology bug. In the 1980s, his relatives had found Byzantine mosaics in a cellar behind their home. But his older siblings had always said there were larger and more impressive mosaic floors under the main part of their home. Relics, they said, were briefly discovered and then rehidden during renovations in the 1950s. What if his siblings were right? Guided by Dr. Kamisi, the Araf family dug for 2 weeks. 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet deep. Just beyond the 4-foot mark, Dr. Kamisi made another shout. He had found what turned out to be the nave of a Byzantine church. For a token fee to cover his expenses, Mr. Araf lets tour groups visit his house to see the mosaics, which are inside the lower story of his 2-story house. Occasionally, visitors have struggled to dispel their disbelief. Mr. Araf said, in a context in which Jews, Muslims, and Christians often argue over who has a stronger connection to the land, some Jewish visitors have dismissed the idea that a Christian could have found a genuine Christian ruin beneath his own home. But to Mr. Araf, such criticism hardly registers. He still marvels at the fact he has a ruined church underneath his aunt's old bedroom. "I check it on every day," he said, "just for my own joy." Rawan Sheikh Ahmad Okay. Let me go on. I started going on to the other article. I think that's so interesting. Can you imagine? digging under your floor and finding a church from medieval times. Well, this is, let's see. Oh, this is out of Ripley's. And it's titled The Fearless Daredevils Who Built the Empire State Building. The Empire State Building has always been New York City's most iconic skyscraper. It has been featured in movies, video games, and TV shows throughout history. Even King Kong climbs to its top when it's time to escape his captors. Back when it was completed in 1931, the 102-story Art Deco skyscraper was the tallest building in the world, and it remains so for over 40 years. It was also built insanely fast, not only for something built in the 1930s, but even today it would seem impossible to complete a 1,250-foot skyscraper in just 410 days. This means workers were completing 4.5 floors a week. Given the technology and tools available in the 1930s, this was no easy feat. And it wasn't one that came cheap either. In today's money, the land, planning, and construction of the Empire State Building cost the equivalent to over $750 million. Sounds like a lot of money, but this was actually under budget and ahead of schedule. The Daredevil Skyboys. As impressive as the Empire State Building still is today, perhaps more impressive is the men who are behind its construction. You've seen the photos, workers walking or sitting on beams, swinging up 80 stories up in the air, hanging from precarious cables, or jumping over open spaces hundreds of feet above the street. This wouldn't be possible today, when thankfully safety regulations and standards would demand the use of harnesses at a very minimum. But these daredevils were even a rarity back then, and press photographers loved them. Wow. The 3,400-strong task force, often referred to back then as the Sky Boys, was made up of mainly Italian and Irish immigrant laborers who did everything from laying bricks and installing elevators to setting up heating and ventilation, plus everything in between. A significant number of the iron workers on site were Mohawk, who had come over from the Kanawaki Reservation specifically to work on the building. All workers earned $15 a day, and on busy days, especially towards the end of the construction project, 3,000 men could be on site at the same time. There are 5 known deaths surrounding the construction of the Empire State Building. Unfounded rumors and a story published on the New York Daily News put the death toll at 14 men, or even hundreds, although this has never been verified. The confirmed deaths were caused by either falls or being struck by objects, whether wet weather playing a part in at least some of the deaths. Given the high risk and lack of safety equipment, no harnesses or hard hats anywhere, it's surprising that just 5 workers died during the construction of the building. Compare this to the 30 who died during the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, or over the 1,200 who lost their lives during the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. As for the possibility of your everyday pedestrian being killed by a coin dropped from the roof of the Empire State Building, non-existent. I'm looking at these pictures. Let me tell you. Nerves of steel? I don't know. And I know that during these, remember, when they were building this was right after the Depression. So people needed jobs, wanted, I can imagine, all these men that you see them doing these crazy stuff, a lot of them it was because I need to feed myself, my family. There were no jobs, and if they said, yeah, we got a job for you, but you got to go up there. Oh, I don't know about that. That would be a tough choice. But hats off to them. Okay. This next story is out of the U.S. Sun, and it's titled Brave New World, Inside Plans for Off-World Human DNA Seed Bank on Moon so Alien Civilization could recreate us. Okay, SpaceX just launched a lot of human DNA to the International Space Station. The Crew 4 mission blasted off on April 27th, and part of the cargo was a biobank containing DNA from 500 different species. One of those species was humans, and there are now over 2,000 different DNA samples from lots of different people in space. A company called LifeShip is behind the DNA collection. It hopes to one day create an off-world genetic human seed bank on the moon. The idea is similar to the global seed vault we have on Earth. The global seed vault has a capacity to hold 4.5 million seed samples. If there happens to be a global catastrophe and a lot of life on Earth was destroyed, the global seed vault would help humans grow plants again or help a species come back from the brink of extinction. LifeShip aims to do a similar thing but with humans and other animals. Its website states, "At LifeShip we believe that humanity has an important part to play in continuing the cycle of life in the universe and expanding life outwards from our planet. We believe in preserving the genetic blueprint of Earth's incredible biodiversity as it is today for future generations. We believe in furthering the human story into the cosmos so that we leave a legacy and are never forgotten. We believe that we can achieve this by taking small steps towards seeding life beyond Earth and extending humanity to the stars. Sending human DNA to the ISS, which is International Space Station, was just a demonstration mission. The plan is for human DNA to be sent to the moon in 2023. LifeShip wants a genetic time capsule to be put on the moon's surface during NASA's Astrobotic Lunar Lander mission. The company isn't 100% sure what will happen to human DNA in the distant future. Its website says because a genetic time capsule is designed for the far future, none of us will ever actually know for sure. Perhaps it will be found by a future civilization and used to recreate our planet as it is today. Our descendants could carry our code to the stars to seed a brand new world. While this is all theoretical, we believe it is worth saving our genetic blueprints of life on Earth for generations. LifeShip is still inviting humans to send over their DNA for future missions. You can sign up to send your DNA on its website. I don't know. Because, let's face it, they're talking out and out cloning, because what else are you going to do with DNA seeds? You know, I don't know. I know that there's a lot of so-called benefits to the abilities to clone, but when you start talking, especially cloning humans, I'm very, very wary of that. Very wary of that. Okay, let's go to prehistoric times for the next article out of The Guardian. It's titled Giant Ichthyosaurs, Huge Tooth Points to Sea Creatures with Robust Bite. And the remains of a huge sea creature with enormous teeth that could have helped it capture giant squid have been found in the Swiss Alps. Ichthyosaurs were large marine reptiles with an elongated, snaky shape. They first emerged after the end of the Permian extinction, an event also known as the Great Dying, which occurred about 250 million years ago and which wiped out more than two-thirds of species on land and 96% of marine species. The toothy beast is one of three giant ichthyosaurs discovered in the Swiss Alps and is thought to have lived during the late Triassic period, about 205 million years ago, potentially making them some of the last such behemoths. The team said the findings help resolve the conundrum of whether giant ichthyosaurs, like some smaller species of the creature, had teeth. Professor Martin Sander of the University of Bonn, co-author of the study, said, "It's all very, very scanty evidence. We have these ghosts swimming in the late Triassic oceans for tens of millions of years, and we don't know what they look like. It's an embarrassment for paleontology. For a while we thought they had teeth. Then we thought, well, we never find any teeth. Now we have the tooth of a giant and a giant tooth. So some of them have teeth." Writing in the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology, the team described how they discovered fossils from three giant ichthyosaurs at different sites in the Cosson Formation between 1976 and 1990. A fossil from one of the beasts was an incomplete tooth 10 centimeters in length. The team found an enormous vertebrae and rib fragments relating to another. The fossils of the third included 7 large vertebrae. Sanders said none of the remains appear to be of a known species of ichthyosaur. The team say the tooth, which lacks most of its crown, is only the second to have come from a giant ichthyosaur and is the largest ever found for such a creature, surpassing those of a species known as Himalayasaurus, which was discovered in China and is thought to have the body length of about 15 meters. Ichthyosaurs have a very characteristic tooth structure that's visible in the root and also in the crown, said Sander, adding that the toothy giant discovered in the Alps probably would have eaten smaller ichthyosaurs and giant squid. Sanders said one of the creatures appeared to have been about the same size as a Himalayasaurus, while the other two, including the toothy beast, were probably similar in size to the giant ichthyosaur Shastasaurus, a creature from previously in British Columbia, and that was about 21 meters long, around 2 double-decker bus lengths. That skeleton had vertebrae that are the same diameters as the one from the Alps, said Sander. But they are not the largest ichthyosaurs known to have lived. Among other finds, a toothless jawbone discovered in the Bristol Channel is thought to belong to an ichthyosaur that was about 26 meters long. While ichthyosaurs roamed around the oceans, the newly reported remains were laid down in what was once a lagoon, suggesting the beast went into shallow waters. It's kind of the same problem when you get a sperm whale in the North Sea, said Sander. Dr. Ben Moon, a paleontologist at the University of Bristol, who was not involved in the work, said it was possible the creatures might have entered shallow waters to mate or give birth. He said the new report was exciting as there were few fossils of giant ichthyosaurs. Dr. Nick Fraser, a paleontologist at National Museum Scotland, said it was difficult to determine the size of a giant ichthyosaur based on a tooth alone, but that the finds shed new light on the reptiles. Until now, we have suspected that most of the largest ichthyosaurs were toothless and were suction feeders, he said, adding that the size of the newly reported tooth was stunning. The owner of this tooth was not to be messed with, said Fraser. Along with the remains of vertebrae and ribs, here's really concrete evidence that in the past, Triassic waters sheltered some truly massive ocean-going reptiles, possibly as large as a living blue whale, and some likely had huge jaws armed with robust teeth. So you know what? As I remember when I was a kid, dinosaurs were a big deal. And they were so interesting. And then, of course, when Jurassic Park, the original one, came out in the 1990s, this dinosaur thing took off. And, we kind of get stuck thinking that, the only dinosaurs like what people see in the Jurassic, because there's different eras, and they would die out and you would have another version like the T-Rex or the all the ones that you see in Jurassic Park. And there were so many different dinosaurs. And it seems that even within the known ones, there's variations. And of course, I think there's others there that have yet to be discovered. Okay, this other article is out of Vintage News, and it's titled, Is Shakespeare's Grave Cursed? Famous playwright William Shakespeare was no stranger to witches, curses, and superstitions. Even in the afterlife, Shakespeare's writings of floating daggers, bubbling cauldrons, and soliloquies must have left an impact on him, so much so that he wrote one final spooky verse before his death in 1616. Shakespeare's final wish. Shakespeare was buried at the Holy Trinity Church in his hometown of Stratford-upon-Avon. If you visit his grave today, you will be greeted with an eerie warning. Good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man that spares these stones, and cursed be he that moves my bones. According to the history books, Shakespeare was especially concerned about grave robbers looking to profit off of the bard's bones. In the 16th and 17th century, it was common for bodies to be exhumed for research, moved to accommodate a need for more burial plots, or for grave robbers to steal buried valuables like jewelry and the remains of famous people. We're sure you're wondering, has Shakespeare posthumously warnings worked? It's more complicated than you may think. It is speculated that Shakespeare wrote the curse himself, but new evidence suggests this might not be the case. Shakespeare was buried near 4 of his family members, including the grave of his wife, Anne Hathaway, but his ledger stone is the only one that does not have a name written on it. Did he decide on using the 4 lines he wrote as an identifier instead? In 2016, the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death, archaeologists investigated the tomb for the first time. Using ground-penetrating radar, they were able to see inside the grave without disturbing the stone, as per Shakespeare's request. Their findings did reveal that Shakespeare's warning may have not been as successful. In 1879, Argosy magazine published a story about Frank Chambers, a man who agreed to dig up Shakespeare's skull in 1794. Archaeologists were able to confirm that the soil was disrupted at the head of the grave, which is indeed missing a skull. Some historians, like Professor Francis Thackeray from the University of Witwatersrand and Johannesburg, want to exhume Shakespeare's grave to help unearth the truth. Thackeray suggested that exposing the grave and taking high-resolution scans would allow for forensic analysis without moving the bones, as per Shakespeare's final request. Nobody knows where Shakespeare's skull is now, or if Frank Chambers ever experienced the curse on his grave. It seems like in the near future the researchers like Professor Thackeray may learn how effective Shakespeare's curse really is. I bet you that Shakespeare's skull has probably been in some private collector's hands, and then sold like, hey, from here to there, nobody's the wiser, but yeah, somebody's got his skull probably under a glass or something. Okay, and let's go to, let's see, this is also off of the Eerie News website, and this is titled Old Louisiana Records Tell of Cursed Tomb. In 1940, Lawrence Zerilli, who taught Italian at LC48 High School in New Orleans, was writing a history of Italians in Louisiana. In the records of the Mutuo Beneficenza, or Italian Benevolence Society, he came across a story concerning a tomb paid for by the society at the cost of close to $50,000, which was believed to bring death to its creators. In modern times, it became known as the Hex Tomb. Joseph Albino Borelli, Sr., a prominent merchant in the city, conceived of the idea for the tomb. He was president of the society, which had been established in 1843. Pietro Gualdi, an Italian-born artist, was commissioned to design it. Made of solid white marble imported from Italy, it was erected in St. Louis Cemetery No. 1, unofficially known as the City of the Dead. Gualdi had recently completed the tomb when he died from malaria in 1858, age 48, and was the first to be entombed there. Within 18 months, Joseph Borelli died. However, contrary to popular belief, he was not buried at this mausoleum. He was interred at a family tomb he designed for his 17-year-old son, Joseph Jr., who was killed when the steamboat Louisiana blew her boilers on November 15, 1849, a little after 5 p.m. She had completed preparation for departure to St. Louis and was full of cargo and a large number of passengers. At the moment the boat pulled away from the wharf, the explosion shook all the houses in the area down to their foundation. The steamers Bostona and Storm were lying at either side of the Louisiana and were heavily damaged. Passengers and crew on board these steamboats were killed as well. Passengers on the Louisiana who were not torn apart by the blast or scalded were thrown into the water and hit by debris. Others were carried down when the boat sank within 10 minutes of the explosion. It was estimated that between 150 to 200 lives were lost. Debris was hurled everywhere along with human body parts. A large piece of one of the boilers was thrown upon the levee, and one entire, a mass of iron 15 feet long and weighing thousands of pounds, was thrown 600 feet from the river, landing within 3 steps of the doors of the White Mansion Coffee House at the corner of Canal Street. Along the way it cut through bales of cotton, cut a mule in half and a horse and rider who were on the nearby levee. Captain Mason, pilot of the Storm, described where bodies fell from the air into the river like hail. The Times-Picayune reported on November 16, 1849, that Joseph Borelli Jr. was found and expected to recover. However, this turned out to be a mistake, and only his watch was found on the levee. Lawrence Zerilli, who came upon the story, was an Italian-born barber. In his youth, he worked at a shop in South Clinton Avenue in Trenton, New Jersey. He moved to Tampa, Florida, and was ordained as a Baptist minister in 1908. By 1917, he had moved to New Orleans and worked as a professor at the Baptist Bible Institute. Reverend Zerilli passed away in 1952 at the age of 74. However, his only daughter, Mary Ann Zerilli, died in 1944, aged 22, 4 years after he came across the story in the records of the society. In the 1969 movie Easy Rider, Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper, with 2 hookers in tow, go to the cemetery for an all-night party. The scene was shot at the Italian Mutual Benevolent Society mausoleum. Filming took place without permission from the Catholic Church, who owned the cemetery and who were scandalized when the movie was released. Peter Fonda climbed onto the lap of the charity statue adorning the mausoleum, and it is said that in order to heighten his acting, he began talking about his mother's suicide when he was 10 years old. Her name was Frances Seymour Brokaw Fonda, and she was a New York socialite who sued her husband Henry for divorce in January 1950 after 13 years of marriage. The respondent was Susan Blanchard, stepdaughter of Oscar Hammerstein. 4 months later, Frances Fonda committed suicide on April 14th, 1950. She was a patient at the Craig House Sanitarium where she was recovering from a nervous breakdown. A nurse found her in the bathroom with her throat slashed with a razor blade. She left a note that read, "Very sorry, but this is the best way out." Henry Fonda came to the sanitarium, sent his wife's body to a crematorium, and then he returned to New York to continue in his performance of the sold-out show Mr. Roberts that he starred in. Under terms of her will, Frances left $300,000 to be shared with her mother, brothers, and sister, and eventually go to her children, Jane and Peter. Another property in New Jersey was left to a daughter by her former marriage. Henry Fonda was cut off. She had made the will out in October 1949, 6 months before she died. Henry Fonda married Susan, 20 years his junior, in December of 1950. Jane Fonda, writing her memoirs decades later, discovered her mother had been sexually abused as a child. The beautiful statue at the mausoleum named Charity was vandalized in recent years, and the head and one of the hands were broken off. Other statues were damaged as well. Were there others who fell victim to the curse of the Italia mausoleum? It's not known. And why it would be cursed to begin with is as much a mystery today as it ever was. So there you go. And I will be back soon, hopefully tomorrow or the day after, with some more Eerie news. And of course, you can always go to Eerie.news to sign up for a newsletter or to check out any of our articles. And until then, take care.